What do Vladislav the Vampire from What We Do in the Shadows, Lestat from Interview with the Vampire, and Alucard from the manga series all have in common? They've all got the same real-life prototype. And no, it's not Count Dracula. It's a guy named Peter Plogowitz, a regular Serbian peasant from the 1700s. And the whole thing kicked off because after he died, his body didn't decompose the way it was supposed to. Peter Plogowitz, the vampire who started it all. Today, vampires are hands down the most popular mythical figures in pop culture. Huge movies are still coming out. I mean, we just had Renfield with Nicolas Cage in 2023, and the Nosferatu remake with Willem Dafoe in 2024. And Nosferatu is actually this wild case where modern audiences got hooked on a black and white movie that's over 100 years old. Just think about that for a second. And Dracula alone. There have been more than 270 movies made about him, but here's the thing. Originally, the vampire was just a local legend, something the Eastern Slavs and folks in the Balkans talked about. The whole world didn't care until Peter Plogowitz came along. Back in his younger days, Peter was what they called a hajuk, basically a fighter pushing back against Ottoman rule. Later on, he settled down and became a simple farmer in a Serbian village. Then in 1725, Peter died, and that's when things in the village got really weird. Within a few weeks, 10 of his neighbors were dead, and every single one of them, right before they died, said the same thing. Peter came to them at night, climbed on their chest, and started choking them. The villagers who were left were so freaked out they were ready to pack up and abandon the whole place. Now, just a few years before this, Serbia had flipped from the Ottoman Empire over to the Habsburg Empire, and the new rulers were keeping a tight eye on these border territories. So they sent an Austrian military official named Ernst Frombold out to the village of Kiselova. His job, along with the local priest, was to officially dig up Peter's body and take a look. And what they found was straight up horrifying. Peter's face was flushed and rosy. His body looked plumper than when he was alive. Fangs had apparently come through, and his nails and hair had grown. Frombold wrote in his report, and I'm paraphrasing here, that inside the mouth he noticed, to his surprise, a fair amount of fresh blood, which according to the locals Peter had sucked out of the people he'd killed. So they drove a stake through the vampire's heart, and when they did, the body let out a groan. Another line from the official report: not only did a lot of fresh blood pour out of the ears and mouth, but there were other, quote, wild signs, which out of respect I'll leave out. And yeah, that's basically a polite 18th century way of saying the corpse had an erection. A village priest and an imperial official found this on a dead body. Now today we get it. Decomposition depends on what stage the body's in and the weather. A body that's bloated with gas can look bigger and fuller than when the person was alive. Those same gases push blood up to the skin, making it look rosy. And when you drive a stake into a bloated corpse, yeah, it makes a groaning sound, especially when the air escapes through the windpipe. But they didn't know any of that back then. And on top of that, the whole thing lined up perfectly with local legends about upiri, that's the old Slavic word for vampire. Frombold actually heard the word upiri from the peasants, but he garbled it in his report, and that's how we ended up with the word vampire. His report made it into a big Austrian newspaper, and it became an absolute sensation. And honestly, why wouldn't it? It was this exotic story out of the newly conquered territories. A Lutheran pastor named Michael Ranft got inspired by the whole thing and wrote a treatise with the incredible title, On the Chewing Dead in Their Graves. His ideas got picked up by a French theologian named Augustin Calmet, and then, get this, Voltaire himself jumped into the debate. Meanwhile, over in Serbia, full-blown vampire hysteria broke out. Peasants were digging up their neighbors' graves left and right, looking for vampires. The imperial government had to step in and shut it down fast. Things got so out of hand that Empress Maria Theresa sent her personal physician to investigate, and he came back with the obvious conclusion: there are no vampires. The Empress passed a law making grave digging illegal. Hysteria over. But by that point, the vampire had already gone mainstream across Europe. It was now a political issue, a literary character, and a topic philosophers were arguing about. Look, blood-drinking demons have been part of folklore for as long as civilization has existed. The Sumerians had them. They were called Utuku and Ikimu. The Assyrians believed in a demon named Lilith, who'd seduce young men and drink their blood. The Arabs believed that abandoned tombs and ruins and graveyards were haunted by ghouls, corpse eaters, whose bloodthirsty reputation even shows up in 1001 Nights. The ancient Greeks had Hecate, the goddess of night and witchcraft, and they figured she kept two blood drinkers in her entourage. The first was a demon called Empusa, who had donkey legs and drank the blood of sleeping men. The second was Mormo, who drank the blood of misbehaving kids. And get this, some people actually still believe in Mormo today. The Romans, meanwhile, were scared of a bird-like demon called a Strix, looked kind of like an owl and fed on human flesh and blood. The Aztecs had their own vampires, so did the Chinese, the Irish, tons of other cultures. But the vampire we know today, that came from Slavic legends, people living in the Balkans, in southern Russia, in Belarus and Ukraine, they believed the earth itself could reject certain dead people. They called these the restless dead. That category included suicides, criminals, folks who never got a proper funeral, and anybody who died an unnatural death. So, for example, people who froze to death out in the woods or on the side of the road. These kinds of dead were buried at crossroads, at the edges of fields, anywhere in between, outside the church grounds. Dead sorcerers got lumped in with the restless dead too. After they died, they could climb out of the grave to drink their neighbor's blood. But vampires did more than that. They caused disasters, big ones, hail and drought, livestock dying off, all kinds of diseases. Now here's where it gets really interesting. Bram Stoker, the guy who created Dracula, he didn't actually base his stuff on Slavic folklore. He went with Romanian legends. Stoker said it himself in Dracula. Every superstition in the world has gathered in the horseshoe of the Carpathians, as if this spot's the center of some whirlpool of imagination. And honestly, Romanian vampires are something else. There are a bunch of different kinds, but two main ones, Strigoi and Striga. A Strigoi is a living vampire. You don't become one, you're born one. Either you're the child of incest, or you were conceived during a major religious holiday. The belief was that if a pregnant woman went out at night with her head uncovered, or drank unclean water, her kid would turn into a Strigoi. Babies weaned too early, Strigoi. The seventh son of a seventh son, Strigoi. Kids born out in the woods, or cursed by a midwife, same deal. Being skinny, having red hair, going bald, or hiding a little tail, those were all dead giveaways that somebody was a Strigoi. People believed they could shapeshift, but not into bats, into cats and dogs, bulls, roosters, even cockroaches. Here's a fun one. Strigoi supposedly loved picking fights with each other to figure out who's in charge. And a regular human could actually jump into these fights and win. How? You had to cheat, show up to the brawl with a saber. Now a Striga, that's the dead version of the vampire. You could become one if, say, a cat jumped over your corpse, or a dog, or a chicken, or a mouse. Babies who died unbaptized also became Striga, or kids who were born in secret and buried outside church grounds. They'd crawl out of their graves at midnight and wander around the countryside, sometimes dragging their own coffin along with them. Just like the Slavic vampires, they'd spread cholera and ruin livestock. And when a Striga got to their old house, first thing they'd do is suck the souls of the family members right out through the windows. Then they'd go inside, drink their blood, and eat their hearts. The bodies of these Romanian undead didn't decompose at all. There's this one Romanian tale that paints an incredible picture. Villagers dig up an old man, and there he is, sitting cross-legged, red as a beet and perfectly content, because he'd already eaten most of his own family. Now people came up with all kinds of ways to keep a dead body from becoming a Striga. They'd plug up the nose and ears, tape the eyelids shut, so the corpse couldn't see or hear the devil. A lot of times they'd tie the body up tight and stick a spike right in the heart. If the dead person had a bad reputation in the village, they'd just go ahead and cut the head off and put it by the feet. You know, just in case. The Romanians were so inventive with this stuff, they literally came up with their own Hogwarts, 4 vampires. In Dracula, Stoker mentions this school of magic called the Scholomance, up in the mountains above Lake Hermannstadt. The devil himself runs the place, and every 10th student he keeps. Count Dracula supposedly went there, and the book says there wasn't a single subject in his time he didn't master. The graduates of the Scholomance, called Solomonary, are sorcerers from Romanian folklore with massive magical powers. They fly around on tame dragons. They control the weather. They talk to nature spirits, speak animal and bird languages, and read ancient texts. But people's opinion on them is kinda mixed. They're not so much evil as chaotic. A Scholomance might send a hailstorm your way, or they might turn one away. They live by their own weird rules, they don't chase money, and honestly they come across more like a monastic order. Though there is a clearly dark side. If you don't do the right rituals over a dead Scholomance, he'll come back as a Striga. After all this, you might think it took a long time to get from Peter Plogowitz to the Dracula we know today, but surprisingly, not really. The vampire story hit right when Romanticism was taking off, perfect timing. Back in the 1700s, Goethe wrote a poem called The Bride of Corinth, where vampire stuff gets tangled up with romance, and by the early 1800s, Lord Byron himself became the template for a new kind of vampire, aristocratic, drenched in dark ego. Here's something wild. This new literary monster was born on the same night, in the same room as Frankenstein's monster. 1816, the so-called year without a summer. Byron and a few of his friends were hanging out at a villa in Switzerland. The weather was awful, so Byron suggested everybody write a ghost story. That's the day Mary Shelley started writing Frankenstein, or the modern Prometheus. And Byron himself came up with the plot of a vampire novella. He ended up ditching the idea, but his personal doctor, a guy named John Polidori, remembered it. 3 years later, Polidori published a story called The Vampire. Its main character was a full-on Byronic figure, basically the prototype for every romantic undead that came after him. Bram Stoker's Dracula came out 78 years later, and locked in the vampire image we all know, an aristocrat hiding terrible secrets, something more than human. Stoker also leaned into another key element that these earlier writers had come up with, the sexualization of the vampire. Right before Dracula, there was a Gothic novella called Carmilla, where a female vampire seduces a young noblewoman. From that point on, vampires became symbols of raw power and lust, and decadence too. These creatures basically became the perfect stand-in for all the dark impulses of the European aristocracy, and that's what made them so compelling to readers. Now, using vampires as a metaphor for bloodsuckers in power, maybe that feels a little on the nose. Voltaire said speculators and stock traders were basically vampires. Marx wrote about the vampire nature of capitalism, but the vampire kept evolving with society, reflecting whatever era it was in. Take the 1931 Dracula with Bela Lugosi. He only bit female necks. The screenwriters picked up on the sexual subtext right away and ran with it. Later, the vampire went through all these postmodern twists. You got Blackula, a black vampire. You got every kind of parody, like What We Do in the Shadows. Horror gave way to romance, from Twilight to Jim Jarmusch's Only Lovers Left Alive. In Victor Pellevin's novel Empire V, the vampire is basically the product of a human fused with some parasitic foreign language that takes up residence inside them. And using that language, the host gets the superpower of controlling glamour and discourse. You can actually figure out the character of a whole decade by looking at how they portrayed vampires, which makes the Nosferatu remake all the more interesting. And honestly, Stoker lucked out with his real-life model for Dracula. The Wallachian ruler Vlad Tepes didn't earn the nickname the Impaler for nothing. The guy was brutal, vindictive, famous for cruel executions, and he was a knight of the Order of the Dragon. Technically, the order was just, a regular chivalric order. But to an English writer, all this looked like exotic Eastern barbarism and a wild fairy tale. Especially since Stoker heard about Tepes from this eccentric Hungarian Orientalist named Arminius Vambéry, who, by the way, was a secret agent for British intelligence. And it gets better. Vlad supposedly suffered from Hamala Shire, a condition that literally makes you cry, tears of blood. I mean, come on, that's a gift for a novelist. Though honestly, Dracula wasn't all that different from the other Balkan rulers of his time. Or, like the character in What We Do in the Shadows puts it, life back then was rough. Count Dracula actually can't hold a candle, sadism-wise, to real-life vampires, the serial killers of the 20th century who drank their victims' blood. Take Richard Chase, here in the States. He thought he was sick, and the only way he could cure himself was by drinking human blood and eating fresh animal organs. Straight out of Renfield from Dracula, And over in Germany, Fritz Hamann worked as a police informant and actually used his position to find victims. He'd bring them back to his place, wait until they let their guard down, then rip their throats out with his teeth. Killed 27 people that way. And in both cases, there was a seriously twisted sexual element to the crimes. Look, at some point, using vampire legends, humanity managed to kind of tame its own collective shadow, got to know it, sublimated it, even made it human. Because modern vampire movies, they're basically all romantic dramas or comedies. But every once in a while, that shadow breaks through again. Stoker wrote about Dracula. The vampire who lives among us is strong as 20 men. Necromancy helps him. He's cruel, and more than cruel. He's the devil himself, and he has no heart. But you know what? I think what Stoker really meant was the beast inside all of us. Because humanity still hasn't beaten the Count Dracula that lives within.